We actually had RSVPs for a full house, so I expect we might get some people continuing to come in as they find car parks. Can I welcome you all here today, fellow South Australians? I want to congratulate you and particularly congratulate our leaders as being part of what I think is a world first event. This, fellow South Australians, is the first ever political debate devoted to our ageing. And I think that speaks volumes for South Australia, it speaks volumes for our political leaders. Not to put too fine a point on it, in this, as in all other things, South Australia leads the nation. My COTA colleagues in other states look to South Australia as the high watermark in understanding ageing for its possibilities as much as for its challenges. And that doesn't mean it's all fixed, that doesn't mean that there are not, as we know, serious issues and major barriers to older people making the most of our ageing and our longer lives. But I think we've come an enormous journey in terms of understanding that modern ageing is very different from the ageing we inherited from our parents and grandparents, and reframing that and creating a state where ageing is one of our great assets. It is an important journey for us all, and I congratulate all three of our political leaders today because they've been part of that journey. Today I acknowledge that we meet on the lands of the Kaurna people, and I pay my very deepest respects to Kaurna elders of the past, of the present, and very much of the future. I'd like to ask you to turn your phones to silent, but I'm begging you not to put them away. We would love you to be twittering madly using COTA, hashtag COTA Election Forum as your hashtag, and twittering madly as we get on with events today. But I do warn you that anyone who is wagging work today needs to square it with your boss really quickly, because we are live streaming on Facebook and she will see you here. So please make sure that you let her know quickly. Importantly, I also need to tell you that the toilets are just at the end of the corridor and to the left, and the emergency exit, you turn a sharp left at this door and then out through the glass door on the left. That's all from me. I just want to introduce you to your moderator today. Your moderator is Anne Burgess, who we're lucky enough to have as our Deputy President here at COTA SA, and Anne is also the chair of our COTA SA Policy Council. Anne has served previously as the Commissioner for Equal Opportunity, as a public advocate, as a senior public servant in health, and indeed a fine career in mental health services. She chairs the board of the Age Rights Advocacy Service that we're lucky enough to share our building with, and is a member of the National Aged Care Alliance. Anne.
Thanks, Jane, and I too want to welcome you today to our Leaders Forum on Ageing. Jane mentioned that this was a world first. I do love an enthusiastic chief executive. I reckon it's a triple jump with a twist or something like that, a double pike with a something or other, because this is one of 3 forums that we're holding across the state, giving older people a chance to listen to our leaders and to gather the information that they need as we go into the election. I hope that all of you who are here today have had a chance to submit a question. There's a very short time frame around this forum, and that means that we mightn't get to all the questions, but we'll get to the ones that we can. I particularly want to welcome our leaders this morning. Sometimes we don't acknowledge, I think, that politics is hard work, particularly at election time. It's mad March and it's an election. And I think election campaigns ask even more of our candidates and especially our leaders. So I thank you for giving your time to come to the forum today, and we promise that we'll conduct this, won't we, with respect and fairness in the spirit of our great state. It's extremely important that you're here as leaders because for this election, more than 50% of all voters will be older people, more than 50%. So this is a really important conversation for us all to have. We are a mighty voice. COTA recognises that this comes with enormous responsibility. Have a voice, but you need to have the responsibility. And we work hard as COTA to reflect the diversity of older people, diversity of backgrounds and interests and cultures and views that are represented by 633,000 older South Australians. It's a significant number. So as I said, this forum is part of a series of initiatives for older people to share their views and make the most of the voice that they have. At the end of last year, in November and December, COTA moved across the state, and we had a number of forums where we talked to older people about what were the things that concerned them the most. What were they worried about? What did they think worked in terms of their lives as older people, and what were they concerned about? And out of that information, we compiled an election platform, and on your seats today, you'll see a copy of that election platform. So we have the views of older people about what matters to them, and today we have the chance to hear from our leaders about how they view those concerns. So COTA SA is an older people's movement. We're a people's movement. We're committed to changing the way we think and do ageing. We must tackle ageism and our community's negative views of the value of our older lives by being heard, standing up, and being visible like we are today. So without further ado, it gives me great pleasure to introduce the leaders. So at my far end, Nick Xenophon was a senator representing South Australia in the Senate between 2008 and 2017, having previously been a member of the South Australian Legislative Council from 1997 to 2007. Once an independent, he now leads SA Best, and prior to entering politics, Nick worked as a lawyer. Stephen Wade is here representing the Leader of the Opposition, Stephen Marshall. Stephen has been a Liberal member of the Legislative Council since 2006, is currently the Shadow Minister for Health and Wellbeing, which means he covers the area of health, ageing, mental health, substance abuse and suicide prevention. Prior to entering politics, Stephen worked in corporate governance and served on a range of boards. Jay Weatherill has been Premier of South Australia since 2011. He was first elected as the member for Cheltenham in 2002. It feels a long time ago, Jay. And prior to becoming South Australia's 45th Premier, he served as the Minister for Ageing, Families and Communities and Environment, to name but a few. Prior to entering politics, Jay worked as a lawyer. So to start today, we've asked all of our panellists to talk for up to 5 minutes about the things that matter most to older people and their priorities for the community should they win this seat on March 17. We tossed the coin, and today Nick will speak first. I just want to warn everybody, I've got this green bell that says ring for chocolate, and I'm going to ring it on the 4-minute timeline just to give people a minute's notice about keeping to time. So Nick, over to you.
Thanks very much, Anne, and I acknowledge that we're on Gunga land and pay respect to elders past, present and future. Of course, acknowledge the Premier, Stephen Wade, parliamentarians present, Zoe Bellison's here, Francis Bedford's here at the back row, always in the back row, Francis. And I see that Rick Neagles from Dignity, the Dignity Party's here, and Peter Vincent, who is an aged care advisor, nursing advisor, one of our House candidates who's been instrumental in formulating the policy along the Cape Vector. There are certain inalienable rights that we as citizens can expect from our governments and our leaders. The right to inclusion in decisions that impact on how we live, the right to be protected by laws that are fair and reasonable, the right to access services that support us as individuals regardless of our age, gender, cultural background or religious beliefs, and the right to be valued and recognised as being able to contribute to society regardless of age. Ageing is a term that is synonymous with growing old, when in fact it is a term that should reflect a life journey. Because it is our life journey, that will be the only determinant on how successfully we age. The WHO specifies the following societal structures as having the greatest impact on an individual's ageing process and life journey: the quality of the community in which we live, the opportunities for safe, secure housing, the opportunity to access meaningful education, the opportunity for employment to generate personal wealth and be self-sufficient, and opportunities to have access and equity in receiving healthcare and health education. These are all fundamental issues. The question is, how do we achieve them? I want to say that SA Best has released a vulnerable adults policy, which I think hopefully will resonate with many of you here today. We say that we need to have new laws in place as an urgent priority for the next South Australian Parliament, irrespective of who forms the government. That there must be laws to protect vulnerable persons from neglect and psychological, physical, sexual and or financial abuse. It will cover the elderly and other vulnerable adults with diseases such as Alzheimer's, which diminish a person's capacity to protect themselves, the latter not being appropriately protected under current laws. And central to our policy is the implementation of the key findings from the Office of the Public Advocate of the Closing the Gaps report back in 2011, a major report delivered to the government in 2011, making strong recommendations to protect elderly people from abuse in South Australia. We need those laws more than ever. We need to implement the framework that was recommended back in 2011, and this ought to be an urgent priority. We need to ensure that there is a South Australian Vulnerable Adult Protection Act to provide for the protection of vulnerable adults, to establish an independent South Australian Vulnerable Adult Protection Unit to take the lead for investigating, intervening and coordinating interagency responsibilities for protective measures, to ensure legislative and regulatory reform carries sanctions against healthcare staff, operators and departmental administrators, including ministers who are found to be guilty of failing to report to regulatory authorities. The Oakden report made the point, Commissioner Lander made the point, that ignorance appears to be a defence in terms of change responsibility in respect of maladministration. That should be removed. If you ought to have known about issues of abuse, then you ought to be held accountable to that. I think that's a very important institutional and fundamental reform. We want to ensure that there is strong inclusion for consumers within all levels of governance of the proposed protection unit to facilitate the installation and use of CCTV cameras in residential care facilities. I know what happened to Mr. Hausler several years ago, the late Mr. Hausler, and his daughter's relentless advocacy for him, balanced with privacy and governance considerations with the consent of the residents of the Guardian. In terms of protecting financial interests, provide review mechanisms of activities under the Power of Attorney and Agency Act to provide for mandatory auditing of financial transactions of people holding power of attorney, and to work cooperatively with all state, territory and Commonwealth governments to coordinate a best practice national approach, including interagency collaboration to develop reliable risk assessment tools, a national database to collect and collate research on all reported incidents of elder abuse, the use of chemical, physical restraints and seclusion, culturally effective programs. We need to use interpreters more. Indigenous Australians in our state, the use of interpreters would be very valuable, and being aware of that. I think that it's not a criticism of my colleagues, not at all. I think it's something we need to be acutely aware of. I think the government's implemented some changes, but we need to be constantly progressing that. We need to have community awareness of the significant value and contribution of senior members of South Australia and the awareness of the rights of all people at the highest standard. And we need to have official visitors, such as Maurice Corcoran in his capacity, or whoever, and any future community advocates, to have a capacity to furnish reports outlining issues and to have that access that is needed. That's an issue that was identified in Oakden, and I'd like to think that there is no controversy about reforming that. The Closing the Gaps report is an authoritative plan. It was supported by COTA, yet it hasn't been implemented in full. This ought to be a priority. We already have a template in order to deal with these issues, and I think that will deal very significantly with issues of abuse, with issues of disadvantage, of issues of vulnerability. And I think that is absolutely fundamental. What SABS would like to do, though, is to have stronger governance mechanisms so that the Parliament is there to act as a watchdog at all times of these issues. If need be, to have a standing committee to look at issues of vulnerable persons abuse, to have that vulnerable persons unit that reports to the Parliament, to have a stronger governance framework so that any of these issues can be dealt with. And another fundamental issue relates to whistleblower protection. Sharon Olsen was a senior nurse at Oakton. She was director of nursing at Oakton for a brief period of time. She effectively was told to keep quiet and sent back to Glenside, where she worked, because she felt that she couldn't speak out and she feared that there would be repercussions against her and her career. We need to reform whistleblower protection laws, particularly in this sector. That would be a very useful thing to do. Thanks very much.
Parliamentary colleagues, Mr. Xenophon, invited guests. Thanks for the opportunity to share with you the Liberal Party's vision and positive policies for ageing well in South Australia. I'd like to thank COTA for organising the forum and for its very comprehensive state election platform. The platform not only identifies a number of challenges facing our state, it also proposes positive ways forward. Fundamentally, liberalism is about empowerment, empowering people to live lives to the full, lives of their own choosing. In that, we are committed to fight isms. Many isms are familiar, such as sexism, but increasingly we need to tackle ageism. The isms are the social attitudes and the structural elements which devalue and constrain a person according to some arbitrary criteria, whether it be gender, disability, sexuality, or age. Ageism is corrosive in a similar way to sexism. It limits what society expects an older person to do and what a society supports an older person to do. Perhaps its greatest impact is in the enfeeblement of people. Older South Australians often limit their own expectations of what is possible. They limit their horizons. They do not live their lives to the full. Just as we combat sexism in society, in business and in government, we need to do the same with ageism. I was concerned earlier this year when my 88-year-old father decided he was going to go around the world alone. I was trying to protect him, but it is his life. He has the right to take risks. There is dignity in risk. Government has a role not just to drive social change, but to address discrimination and to act to support people to live full lives and take risks. But my dad and other Australians, other older Australians, including myself, need to work harder in some areas of our lives to be able to live a full life. With a bad hip, mobility was fundamental to Dad being able to make that next step. Preventive health is vital for older South Australians. I recognise the COTA commitment both in the platform and in your programs such as Strength for Life. Preventive health both avoids and delays the onset of illness and disability and helps us all to live fuller lives in the meantime. The Marshall Liberal team has made preventive health the central tentpole of our health policy framework. We will actively promote health interventions for older people in the prevention space. After years of Labor's cuts to preventive health, we will establish Wellbeing SA as a health promotion and primary health care focused organisation. I'm delighted to say that that agency will partner with COTA in expanding the Strength for Life program. But for many, prevention needs to be supplemented with corrective action. My dad's world trip was only possible because of a hip replacement. Older Australians, South Australians in particular, are waiting far too long for the medical treatment that will enable them to live fuller lives. Labor's performance over the last 4 years has been appalling. Currently, there are more than 1,700 overdue elective surgery appointments in South Australia, 3 times at the same level last year. And that's why earlier this week, the Liberal Party committed $40 million to tackling the overdue elective surgery backlog. There are also tens of thousands of South Australians stranded on the hidden waiting list for an outpatient appointment. They're waiting to get on the waiting list. Almost 300 of the 3,600 people on the ophthalmology outpatient list of the region have been waiting for more than 5 years. The Liberal Party has a strong plan to bring down the elective surgery waiting lists and support older people to live active lives. I'd like to finish the introduction reaffirming our commitment to confront ageism. A Marshall Liberal government would actively combat ageism through targeted social campaigns. We would challenge the way ageing is framed in the language of government and the services that government delivers. To make that point clear, a Marshall Liberal government will rename the Office for the Ageing as the Office for Ageing Well. We will scrutinise the way government services are delivered to identify whether consciously or unconsciously, older South Australians get a lesser service and work to improve services for them. Ageing is inevitable. The challenge is to support older South Australians to age well. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Anne. My parliamentary colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, candidates, can I also acknowledge that we gather today on the traditional lands of the Kaurna people. I don't think there's a more exciting public policy agenda than the Ageing Well agenda. We announced some time ago, back in February 2015, in the Governor's speech, that South Australia could be known as the place where people aged but didn't grow old, and it was derided as the Peter Pan clause. But since then, people have begun to understand the strength of this idea. The truth is that this cohort of older people have changed every single era that they've moved through. The so-called baby boomer era, they have completely changed politics, they've changed the world of work, they've changed every single era they've moved through, and they're going to change the view of ageing, as they're just simply not going to put up with what perhaps their grandparents put up with. And this is an incredibly powerful force that we can tap into. People in their 60s, 70s, 80s and 90s and beyond are going to create extraordinary opportunities for our state. Not just opportunities for them to live well, but also the jobs and prosperity that flows through the services and the goods that are necessary to have their needs met. We declared some time ago the arrival of a new industry, the Ageing Well industry. And it is an extraordinary opportunity. I'm pleased to see that it's now been adopted by our political opponents. It now looks like a bipartisan idea. I was given some insight into the strength of this idea when we were at a national conference where the President of China and the Prime Minister of Australia was there. We had all of the governors of China. And there was a moment where we had a bit of a gap, and because we were waiting for the arrival of the President, and I asked a question about South Australia's leadership role in relation to ageing. And every single Chinese governor hit their buttons immediately to respond. They are facing an extraordinary demographic wave of challenges to deal with older people. And they're incredibly excited about a jurisdiction that's decided to elevate this to a public policy priority. So that's what we did. We went out in 2016 in a series of discussions called Shaping the Future, where people painted a very different picture about retirement and ageing in South Australia. They told us they wanted to contribute, to be active, to continue to live good lives that South Australia is known for, to be less invisible, to be more included, and to contribute in a range of ways that mattered to them. To do this, people told us they needed both opportunity and affordability. At the same time, entrepreneurs are curious to understand this global phenomenon, and they want to be part of it so that they can set up the businesses to respond to these demands. So that's what we've been doing. People over 60 have much more opportunity to contribute, to be productive. But South Australian citizens and entrepreneurs of all ages, given the right conditions, could pioneer global change. So we want to be an international leader in this space, and we're well placed to do it in a broad range of industries: food, tourism, finance, construction, transport, creating thousands of new jobs. And jobs are our number one priority, and this can be one of the strongest drivers in our economy for jobs growth. We want people to have more choice in what they're able to do, and we're developing policy in a range of areas, including in our advocacy with the Commonwealth Government, which is an important player in this regard. We've established the Global Centre for Modern Ageing to advocate and drive this change. This centre works with COTA and others to offer South Australian businesses access to a network of people to better understand what really matters to people in their 60s and beyond. We've created a mechanism and a dedicated service where businesses, research institutions and others can connect and work collaboratively with citizens to co-create and co-design better tailored products and services. We're talking about new services that don't exist, new jobs that haven't yet been imagined. The mechanism for doing this is a thing called the Modern Aging Living Laboratory Network. It's a physical place in the Tonsley, the old Mitsubishi site down there, the first dedicated modern aging living laboratory in this nation, one of the first in the world, largely industry-led with a focus on commercialisation. The insights that result from this intergenerational collaboration for older people, working with young researchers, looking at what product and service delivery looks like to respond to their needs. This service will be provided by the Global Centre for Modern Ageing and help not only people over 60 to actually enjoy better lives, but help them to stay in their homes longer, help businesses connect with this vibrant sector. So this is a very exciting set of possibilities. I also want to touch on a range of initiatives that we've announced during the course of this election campaign. The first is the creation of a massive new super fast broadband network called the Fishbone. We want to connect in more people to ultra fast broadband. Many people feel isolated in their homes, and it's absolutely crucial that we have a way in which we can better connect older South Australians to this vital public service. The internet is now a public service which is an essential service. That's why we promised to create the Department of Digital Innovation. That's why we've committed ourselves to a digital inclusion plan that will involve COTA to make sure that older people get access to the services that they need, which are increasingly becoming online services. The second thing I wanted to commit to today is that a re-elected Labor government will invest $650,000 over the next 3 years to trial a mid-career check and planning service for people aged 50 and over. This opportunity for a bit of a pause in your life to actually think of what will be the next career in your 60s, 70s, 80s and 90s. This is an exciting time of your life. It's not a time to necessarily, it's not the end of anything, it can be the beginning of something. And that's what we want to do, is to give people the opportunity to have that pause to reflect on what could be possible for that next period of their life. The mid-career checks were first proposed by former Age Discrimination Commissioner Susan Ryan as part of her Willing to Work inquiry. We want to build on that with COTA's proposal of a mid-career check and plan package. So this will be a trial. It'll be offered to people over 50, earning less than $40,000 a year, working in the health, community services, disability and aged care sectors. The trial would be offered as a cooperative but independent venture through employers in a range of regions in South Australia to allow them to actually prove this up, and we want to expand it if it proves to be successful. The next initiative I want to mention is something that we've been very proud of. It's a thing called Fund My Neighbourhood. It's something where individual citizens can identify projects and go out and promote them. And one I want to select is one that's in my own backyard in Alberton. A local family just had a shop front and they decided they'd turn it into a community cafe. They teamed up with ECH, the Retirement Villages organisation. And what they've done is created a new space, almost like a village square, near the Alberton Railway Station, where people just across the road from those retirement villages are encouraged to come across, to participate in help groups, to just have a cup of coffee, a better place to meet family and friends. It's been extraordinary what's achieved in just a few weeks. $38,000, the grant that was basically achieved through everybody voting. Everybody looked and said, that looks like a good idea, why don't we do that? But it's unlocked all this extraordinary inclusion and opportunity. It's now packed. It's very hard to get a copy there now. But what it demonstrates is that just by getting people out of their homes to be part of the community, to unlock this enthusiasm and talent and desire to be included, we can do extraordinary things. So I see this sector as one of the most exciting and extraordinary prospective sectors, not just for the well-being of citizens, but for the prosperity of our economy and the jobs that it will create. So I'm very excited about this agenda. And that's why I'm here, because I've prioritised this as an important issue for the future of South Australia. Thank you.
So thank you very much to all our leaders for setting the scene for the next part of our forum, which will be the questions and answers. So let me tell you how the next bit's going to work. Some people have already submitted questions, and I'm just going to pull a couple out of the basket to get us started, and then it'll be over to you. Now, I left my little bell over there, and I'm going to, thanks very much today. I'm going to be pretty strict on this because we want to get answers to as many questions as we can. So if you're asking a question, please make it a question. If you start making statements, I'll bail you out because this is not about making statements. This is about getting information from our leaders. So keep your questions really brief if you can and to the point. And a reminder that this forum is about ageing. So it's not about every little worry that you have, but if it's broadly about ageing and older people and your life as an older person, then that's what this forum is for. So we're going to be pretty strict on that. So I'm sorry, I'm going to have to wear the witch's hat. So if I can just start by picking a question at random out of here. Sorry, on the short one. So this is from Rodden and Whitelock, and it says, would you introduce a monitoring system in aged care facilities, and if so, how? And I might sort of preface that by saying this is to a large extent a question for the Commonwealth. So maybe your response is about how you would work with Commonwealth on those issues. Yeah. I'm happy to go this way to start with, and then I'll mix it up. Thanks, Jane.
Hello.
Yes.
So the question of the introduction of monitoring, which sometimes is described as CCTV facilities, which can be placed in homes. We've had a chance to look at that because there was that awful incident in one of the privately run aged care facilities some time ago that was ultimately detected by a family member. And so it raises the question of CCTV for facilities. We looked at our legislation, state legislation. There's no barrier to that being introduced in federally registered or supervised aged care facilities, which are the overwhelming majority of them. And so there is no barriers to that. There are questions though for the Commonwealth about how that would work. There are probably some important questions about whether they are in common areas or whether they're in private rooms and the distinction between those matters. And also the question of negotiating these issues with workers that exist in those areas. Although I must say, I think that having the existence of CCTV could also be important to assist workers who are being the subject of false allegations. So this can be a protective mechanism for workers. But they're things that need to be worked through at a national level. There's no barrier for them to occur in federally registered or federally supervised aged care facilities. As for state-run facilities, we have introduced them into our new aged care facilities. So the new facilities at Northgate in common areas have CCTV material, which is very important to assist in that monitoring. And we leave it to the individual families to make decisions about what they'll choose to do in their private setting, private rooms. In terms of other aged care facilities that are state-run, we're also exploring the introduction of those in common areas in our other aged care settings as well. It's state-run, federally supervised, but nevertheless we're in the process of rolling those out to those other aged care facilities.
Stephen? Yeah.
Thanks. I think sort of the starting point for the Liberal Party on this is that if you're in a residential aged care facility, it's your home. And if you're in your own home, you can introduce surveillance. So why would your rights be less when you're home, when you need support to live? So we are keen to look beyond the surveillance in the common areas, and we'd be keen to work with co-design such as framework with people in aged care facilities and beyond. I think the Premier's glossed over the way that the state is engaged in residential aged care. We've got, first of all, the Northgate facility is not a residential aged care facility. There are no Commonwealth licences there. But South Australian Health is actually the largest provider of residential aged care in South Australia. All 46 of those nursing homes and other facilities are in country South Australia, but 20 of those 46 are funded under the multi-purpose service hospital funding arrangement. They have no accreditation, and the government's failure to invest in that sector is horrific. For example, in the Kingston facility, a need for fire sprinklers identified in 2003. It still hasn't happened. In Strathalbyn, the need for a fire system improvement was identified 2 years ago. 3 years ago. 2 years later, the government closed the facility without any consultation. There's been next to no investment in residential aged care facilities in country South Australia, in spite of the large community that's served by them. I believe that we need to seriously address how are we going to maintain quality and standards in country retirement settings. The Commonwealth and the states had been talking about it. COA recommended years ago that there be some sort of quality and safety framework in state organisations, state residential aged care facilities funded under MPS. I'm not aware of any action there at all.
I think we should just get on with it. It was in July 2016 that Noreen Hausler exposed what occurred. She was initially threatened with legal action for using that CCTV camera at the time. The Premier and the opposition leader made, I think, very appropriate enough comments expressing their horror of what occurred. I think Jane was quoted saying that we need to look at the implementation of CCTV cameras. Of course, you need to balance it with issues of consent and privacy. I think the Premier's right. It actually goes both ways. It can protect people against allegations of false allegations, which I think would be pretty rare coming from the resident, but it cuts both ways. I think Ken White, who I have a lot of time for, has expressed some concerns about the Commonwealth funding that. I think it would be a very good thing to roll out even on a pilot program sooner rather than later. I think we should get on with it, and if it wasn't for Noreen Hausler's courage, this would have come to the fore in the way that it did.
Okay, thanks. Stephen, can I ask you to go first on this particular question? So, from Stephen Merritt, approaching retirement can be amongst the most complicated transition periods of life. Retirement planning is often interpreted as being synonymous with financial planning. This dismisses the equally important aspects of planning emotionally for the change that this event poses for older people. What importance does your party place on promoting retirement planning for emotional well-being?
Yeah, thanks for that question, Stephen. Certainly we agree with the point that life planning needs to start well into the early middle ages, if you like. A lot of people, as they come to the end of their working life, will experience redundancy. We're experiencing that in a number of industries here in South Australia. So people need to be able to plan. They need to be planned for the conclusion of their career, which might come sooner than they would hope. But as Stephen highlights in his question, it also needs to talk about renewing your life goals, planning for recreation, planning for your health, planning also for other domains such as advanced care directives and legal entitlements. I personally think that we should be linking these planning mechanisms with community and private sector planning opportunities. A lot of now that we have compulsory superannuation, a lot of these funds engage people in financial planning. There may well be opportunities to expand that to other domains of life. I acknowledge the Premier's commitment to the COTA model, and we're interested in that as well. We need to look at all opportunities to encourage people to plan. People, by nature, don't plan. The superannuation is one of the few areas where we basically force them to look to the future, and we need to try and encourage people to do that across all domains. But if we're going to encourage people to plan for the future, we also need to help give them the stepping stones to alternative pathways. And that's why we believe our commitment to an expansion of the retaining opportunities through TAFE are going to be very important for late career workers who need to retrain because of industry restructuring. So we're very keen to roll that out as well.
Thanks. Nick?
Just to follow on from that, I think there's been a great focus on financial planning. When I was in the Senate, there was a lot of argy-bargy about financial planning laws and controls on financial planners and disclosure requirements. Retirement planning is quite different, but interrelated to financial planning as well. It's also broader. I think it's more holistic. I think if there is poor planning, it can lead to depression, to mental health issues, which is why I think we need to open up the ability, whether it's through a state agency, to provide that unbiased, objective help. It also involves issues of employment options. It involves issues of how do you replan your life balance, helping people transitioning to volunteering or part-time work. So I think that financial planners, as good as they can be, there needs to be an alternative and a supplementary option in terms of retirement planning. I think that the state could play a useful role to provide that, given how broad and holistic it is.
Thank you. Yeah, perhaps I'll just provide a few more details about the announcement I made just earlier, the $650,000 over 3 years to trial a mid-career check and planning service for people aged 50 and over. So it is focused on upskilling, retraining, and understanding the future housing and financial goals. So the idea of it would be to, as I said, offer to people over 50 earning less than $40,000 working in the health, community services, disability and aged care sectors initially. The trial will be offered as a cooperative venture through employers in the southern region, which is the largest disability employer region in South Australia. And it will be available for up to 50 employees in each of years 1 and 2. Employees will receive 5 hours of independent expert advice to set career and life goals, including in the areas of housing, finance, superannuation, fitness and wellbeing, and upskilling, including technology. Year 3 will focus on scaling the program to workers in other regions, with other employers leveraging the evidence and partnerships achieved in years 1 and 2 to encourage employer and industry investment in an ongoing program. This region also in the south of Adelaide has been one of the trial sites for the Commonwealth Government's new Career Transition Assistance Program, which is targeted towards mature age Australians. So there's an opportunity for us to work together with the Commonwealth in this regard. We think this is a really important program. If we can prove this up, it could be a model that could be extended across the whole of the state, which is an unlock extraordinary amount of potential. And just that pause, just that systematized sort of pause to actually contemplate what someone's called your on-call career, the next stage in your life, to get a bit of what we know from the evidence is that people that start, so this isn't just another job, it might also be starting a business, or it might be not a business which is entirely for profit. It might be a blend of a social enterprise and a business. People, as they get to that stage of their life, have got an extraordinary amount of experience. Their goals might not just be about money. It might be about some other social benefit. What we also know is that when older people start up a business, they have a higher rate of success than the general level of population because they know more. They've experienced the world more, and they're wiser, and so they make better choices. So these are all very important resources that can be brought to them.
Thanks very much. Okay, so now it's your turn. We've got some mics up the back, and you put your hand up. So the first one there, wait for the mic, give us your name and then your question. Thank you.
My name is Margaret Honor. First of all, at risk of being closed down, I wish to acknowledge how grateful I am for anyone who is prepared to go into politics. I come from a family that has had very much involvement in that world at local, state and federal levels, including the former Premier. In my case, I ran up to the convent because I'm basically lazy. And I've listened to what you poor people go through. Interestingly, on the weekend, I read in the Sunday Mail David Penberthy's article, "Workers have had a gut full of bludgers," and he went on to say, "This is a major problem." In the same paper, 2 pages before,
Can you get to your question?
Yes.
Thanks.
I read about Mari Shaw, proud to say a past pupil of my school at Loretto, and she has helped 2,500 young people with her ICE, whatever it is. I would like to see the politicians throw the problems that you have back on the community, as in the case of someone that's long before your time, called Kennedy, who demanded that the people do what they could for the community instead of leaving it on your shoulders, asking for more and more money, which doesn't solve the problem.
Okay.
Now, my thing is, just tell the people that you have to lift your game. Why do we keep asking you to fix all our problems?
Okay, thanks a lot.
Well, it's a fascinating point, actually, and it's probably one of the first things I said when I put my hand up to be Premier. That is, I wanted to involve people more in the decisions that affect their lives. And this is if there's been a single touchstone for everything that I've sought to do in this role, it's to actually do that. I think it is critically important. Sometimes it's said that you hear a lot of this idea about people have lost faith in politics and politicians. This is a common thing that's said around the place, and a lot of people take advantage of that. And it's been the source of a lot of political dialogue. What if the truth is this? What if politicians have lost trust in people? And that's one of the things that I've tried to explore by actually asking people some of the really difficult questions. I've got a lot of criticism for it. We ask really difficult questions about how our healthcare system runs and try and make changes in that area. And it's very easy to criticise people that are seeking to ask difficult questions to try and improve things. A good example of trusting people to make decisions is this Fund My Neighbourhood idea. This idea of putting a pool of money. It's one of the largest participatory budgeting ideas anywhere in the world. This idea that you actually come up with your own ideas, and the people that determine who actually gets the money is not a series of bureaucrats, but actually a vote of your local community. And what I found fascinating about that was about 1,600 ideas, only 200 of them succeeded. There was almost not one word of criticism. People accepted the legitimacy of actually then choosing themselves to do this. So I think there's something really powerful about what you've just said. I think involving people in the decisions that affect their lives, try and paint for people what the nature of the challenges are, whether they're the challenges in our healthcare system, the challenges of actually growing jobs in this economy. Well, what I've tried to do is to interrogate all of those opportunities that exist for South Australia. All of the areas that I believe are the areas that give us the most opportunity for growth, like ageing. This is one of the fastest growing sectors in our economy. More people employed in this sector and more possibilities of new jobs and opportunities than just about any other sector of our economy. So I think you're right. I think we do. Somehow we've got to find a way of unlocking. Look, the truth is that people like us, we are. I know there's all these people say, "Oh, poor old politicians," I wouldn't do your job in a million years. We're just a group of people like you who are all trying to do the same thing. That is, come up with good answers to the problems that actually face us. That's all we're trying to do. There's nothing different about 3 people sitting here than there is about anybody sitting in the audience. We're all in this together. And I think it's nice to remind people about that. So thank you for that question.
Margaret, I'm not sure whether you took the easy option going to a convent. I'm not sure if that was the easy option. Sounds pretty tough to me. You tell me that sometime. I'm sure you will, maybe anytime after the 18th of March. I have lots of time on my hands, maybe. Can I just say, in terms, I think we need to strengthen the participatory nature of our democratic institutions. One of our policies, which hasn't got much attention in terms of local government, is not only to have a standing committee of the Parliament that looks at local government if there have been excesses or bad management or bad behaviour, but to give the ratepayers in local government 5% or 1,500 ratepayers, whichever is the lesser amount, the chance to petition for the Parliament to inquire into that particular local council. Now, I'm just giving that as a thematic example of, I think there should be a greater degree of participation. And I know in the case of the Glorious Revolution in the 1600s in the UK, the petition system there worked to require the Parliament to address issues. We have a petition system in the state and federal Parliament, but whether we revive that to actually demand that the Parliament, subject to the number of petitions and signatures and the format, to demand that they actually debate the issues of the day, because Parliament, or Parliament, is the usual word, is about to debate and to discuss. And I think that would be an important factor. But also, I think governments do have a role with a little bit of government money, working with community groups to unleash the potential of communities. And that's why you mentioned Murray Shaw, the former District Court judge. You mentioned ICE. A lot of people would think that her program is the ICE Factor program involving ice sports for young people, particularly disadvantaged people and young offenders. It's had remarkable results. And that's the sort of thing I think governments can partner with people like Murray to achieve results.
Yeah, thank you very much for your question, Margaret, and also for your kind words about our vocation. I think there is a problem right around the Western world that the community finds a problem and then looks to the government for an answer, and the government may not have the answer. And I welcome the fact that both of my colleagues have highlighted the need to engage. The Premier mentioned the health reforms as an area where the government asked hard questions and consulted. I think even SA Health admits now that the consultation there was failed. I think COTA actually made public comments recently about the fact that the Modbury Health chains at Modbury Hospital had not engaged older South Australians. We have to find new ways of engaging. We certainly, as a Liberal Party, believe that our proposal of board governance will fundamentally shift the decision making back closer to communities and to clinicians. But we don't see that as the only answer. Every other state in Australia has some form of board governance for health, but many of them have other structures. For example, in Queensland, the health boards are required to have a published strategy for clinician engagement and community engagement. And we need to be able to engage the community in decision making. And COTA uses the word co-design, and I think it's a very good example of what should happen in health. Citizens need to be part of the process of developing the options so that their priorities and values impact on health service delivery. A good example of that, I think, is some of the choices that one finds getting put up by SA Health. But when you dig down, they haven't considered the impact on the patient. It's well and good to centralise services at a hospital, but if fundamentally the price is being paid by patients who have to travel further, is that actually a fair cost-benefit analysis? I'm sorry for using health as an example, but the Premier raised it, and obviously that's an area that I know well. But right across government domains, whether you call it participatory democracy or co-designing processes, modern communities are requiring us to engage, and in terms of sharing the responsibility and finding shared solutions to problems, we need to engage the community in finding those solutions.
Okay, thanks. Can you hold the microphone and go first? Yes, over there in the blue. Oh, sorry, you'll be next. Okay. And name and
Rick Neville from the Dignity Party.
Yeah.
For the Premier and the Shadow Health Minister in particular, but I'd like to hear from all members of the panel. I'll read the question, given that there's a strict time.
Yep.
Following the fallout from the Oakden ICAP report, and given that the Dignity Party and Kelly Vincent has led the charge by establishing a parliamentary select committee to reduce elder abuse, why is your party supported a sharing bills between the Libs, the Labor Party, Greens and Conservatives and other minority parties to deliberately exclude Kelly Vincent from continuing her great work for the Dignity Party. I'm not involved in preference arrangements in our party. I can only speak for how much I've enjoyed working with Kelly in the Parliament over the last 8 years, particularly in the areas of elder abuse. I was on the committee with her. Both Tammy Franks and Kelly, I think it's fair to say, led the charge on borderline personality disorder and a whole range of domains. In fact, she and I both shared on both the Justice for Disabilities Select Committee and the Access to Education for People with Disabilities. So preferences are around it for our party, but certainly from my point of view, I've got nothing but respect for the work that Kelly's done.
I know you personally do those, Stephen, but I'm talking about the party itself.
Well, hold on. Once again, it's a matter for the party how they organise their preferences. But once again, can I just say that we've worked incredibly closely with Kelly Vincent, including on the borderline personality disorder package, which has been delivered. So that promise is actually now being put in place. We've also made a commitment to, if we're re-elected, create essentially a disability ombudsman. We know that Kelly, in many respects, plays that role as a member of Parliament, and she probably shouldn't. It should be a statutory function. So we've committed to creating a function of that sort. It's never been more important in the light of the National Disability Insurance Scheme to have a role of that sort to be able to deal with those sorts of issues. So we've had a very productive working relationship, and we hope that these reforms can come in, and that will be a wonderful role for a strong advocate in the future.
Preferences go all over the shop. It's a very curious world. You've got the Liberal Party placing me after the Labor Party in the seat of Hartley. You've got the Labor Party placing our candidate Jack Noonan behind Stephen Marshall in the seat of Dunstan. And I've got the Greens preferencing me after the Libs, despite the Conservation Council's rating of SA Best well ahead of the Libs. So it's a strange world. I think that there's no rhyme or reason or principle to it. We're happy to preference Kelly number 2 on our LegCo ticket. But can I say, it goes back to an original issue, and that is this is the Closing Gaps report. I recommend that you read it. It's a terrific report. It's not very long. Office of Public Advocate in collaboration with the University of South Australia, the Human Rights and Security Research and Innovation Cluster. We need to go back to the question, why can't we have implemented those key recommendations about protecting vulnerable adults? And I think that's the key issue, and I acknowledge wholeheartedly Kelly's advocacy over the last 8 years.
So the lady in blue, thank you.
Hello, I'm Jean Coles, and I'm someone who is approaching the magical 6-0 and planning well for my life post-working, and I'm a proud COTA volunteer. My question to the panel is, as we approach, as a baby boomer who approaches this time, we're often encouraged to downscale our housing to free up more opportunities for younger people to move into areas closer to the city. I'd like to ask the panel, what are their thoughts and plans for removing some of the barriers and the transaction costs associated with a change in housing, i.e. stamp duty?
Thanks. Nick, you're going to start?
Sure. Look, I think that these are fundamental issues, and it's just occurred to me, I'm the oldest member of this panel. I'm hitting 60 next January. I don't know when you hit 60, but next January, you've got years to go, James. Years to go. These are real barriers, and it goes to issues of urban design, urban planning. I am actually concerned about the level of consolidation in our suburbs, and the fact here that the square mile of Adelaide, that it has half the number of residents, about 17,000, compared to double that number 100 years ago. 23. Oh no, 23 includes North Adelaide. I checked with the Lord Mayor. See? Sorry, I used to say 23 until I checked with the City of Adelaide. So I think you raise a very pertinent issue, and I think that's an issue that must be grappled, because there are real disincentives at the moment for people to shift. You're being told to do one thing but not giving any assistance. So It'd be great to talk to you at the end of the forum or to contact us, because I think that's one of those policy areas that needs a lot more attention.
Yeah, I thank you also for raising the issue of downsizing, and I think it is a matter of addressing stamp duty reform, but also increasing the range of options for available to people in terms of accommodation forms. I acknowledge the work that Zoe Bettison did in this Parliament to reform the retirement villages legislation. That's an example of a accommodation form which is exists completely without government support, and to be frank, to deal with the accommodation challenges for South Australians and Australians generally going forward, we'll need to have a whole range of options, and to make sure that people have confidence in the industry, both in terms of fairness, but also in terms of quality of services provided. So in terms of, I appreciate there's a whole range of other options that could be explored in terms of residential parks and what have you. And even in recent weeks, people have raised with me the possibility of increasing housing options. One of the areas that COTA and COTA have been strongly advocating for is the risk of homelessness for older women, particularly people who find that not only in the closing years of their working life, their relationships might break down, and therefore access to financial resources is limited. So for older South Australians generally, but particularly for older women, we need to make sure that we're developing options.
Thank you. This is an excellent question. Accommodation obviously is at the centre of our lives. So the way in which you can be productive, be well, or if you're unwell, get well, everything really is connected to the quality of your accommodation, your shelter. So this is a very important issue. It's not commonly known, but actually we pioneered in South Australia retirement village legislation. So this licence to occupy, this new property right, is a South Australian idea. It does demonstrate the power of regulatory reform to actually cause new industries. Now it's obviously a more common proposition, but it started here, and it's been an important part of providing new, different, more affordable housing options for people. And as Stephen kindly acknowledged, Zoe Bettison's reform has improved rights for people who are in those retirement villages recently. We introduced an idea of a 15% affordable housing target in all new developments, which has been an important way of creating jobs and opportunities for people that are, so we don't just get high-end housing. I do agree wholeheartedly with what Nick said about increasing the size of the CBD population, and it's grown very significantly from where it was, but it's very much a big opportunity. I think that this is an area where there is no controversy about densities, or less controversy about densities than there is in our suburbs. And so I think we should be encouraging in certain properly zoned areas to have high density living here. We've been encouraging that with a $15,000 essentially stamp duty relief for people that are essentially downsizing. So that it's sort of we've got a first home package. I hesitate to say last home package, but it is it's that type of thing where you downsize. It hasn't been taken up that well. We are doing a bit of work to see why that is the case. But once again, there is a piece of work that's going on in the social housing project, which is one of the outcomes that we put in our Ageing Well policy, which was launched last year, where we're exploring these issues of actually providing more housing options for older South Australians. So well, this is an important area of endeavour. We'll continue to work on it during the life of the next government.
Thanks. Down the front here. Lots of hands up, so we'll ask you to keep the questions and the answers really quick.
Hi, Wendy Lacey from the USA, and I have to disclose I'm one of the principal authors of the Closing the Gaps report. So elder abuse is the focus of my question. Only approximately 6% of Australians over the age of 65 live in residential aged care, and therefore have some protections under the federal government's Aged Care Act. Any new legislative reform at the state level is going to inevitably have to involve communities and local governments in safeguarding the many, many hundreds of thousands of older Australians living in their communities and living in their homes. I'd like to hear from each of the panel members as to how your party would engage with local government government and the communities around elder abuse to better protect and safeguard older people?
Well, the first thing is public advocacy about making sure that this is reified as an idea. So the first thing you need to do is to talk about what elder abuse is and its various different dimensions, so that people can understand it and articulate it and begin to observe it, and also to then know what it means to actually say something about it. Just like we once upon a time didn't have a word for sexual harassment, people just felt uncomfortable. They didn't have a word to describe it so that they could then take steps about it. Once again, we now need to elevate this notion of elder abuse, and it can be subtle, as you would know. It can be financial. It's not always physical. It has a range of different dimensions to it. So being able to articulate what it is, maybe see the warning signs about it, look at risk factors like the isolation of particular people, and then also perhaps use some of our informal mechanisms where people do come in contact with potentially isolated older South Australians, like our Meals on Wheels or other community outreach organisations, and to make sure that they have the skills and the capacity to identify these risks where they occur. So I think they're two essential elements. As you get into a domestic or a private domain, these are the mechanisms that you have to use. Obviously, this could all be strengthened through legislation. I know that's a proposition by COTA to have vulnerable persons legislation. We support that. We think that will be something that will be explored in the life of the government.
I just made the point in terms of Labor saying they're going to explore in the life of the government. Soon after the Closing the Gaps report was presented, Minister Hill told Parliament that it would be delivered. I think Wendy, for highlighting the issue of making sure that we don't just rely on an investigation unit in state government to identify risks. And it reminds me of, I think Jersey has a network based on their version of the postal service, which actually checks in on people. Local government officers are often involved in monitoring homes in terms of hoarding and public health issues. I certainly believe the local government could be part of a network of identifying risks in the community. It reminds me of a chat I had with a JP, and they said how valuable JPs could be because they're often aware of transactions within families, and they've got if you like, a unique opportunity to make a judgment call as to whether that might be suspicious or not. So it's continuing the long haul that Wendy and her professional colleagues have had in advocating for adult protection legislation. I'm sure she's pleased that all three political parties here are committing to legislative reform in the next Parliament. She rightly highlights that that's only the first step. We need to make sure that we've got systems in place to make sure that it works. Closing the Gaps report certainly highlights the need for a multi-agency response. That just doesn't mean state government agencies. And certainly the Liberal Party's commitment to a vulnerable persons agency to manage the investigations also foresees that it would have responsibility for coordinating the response.
Thank you, Professor Lacey, for that question. The report was done almost 6.5 years ago. We need just to get on with it, for goodness sakes. It made recommendations. It should have been implemented 2 parliaments ago. There's a strong framework there. They looked at the international evidence as to what's worked overseas. We should just get on with it. It's there. The work's already been done. We should work on that. It should be a priority of the next parliament, but it should have been done years ago.
Okay, we've got time to have the last question. I saw that hand go up. Yeah.
Hello, my name is Felix Eldridge. I just wanted to follow up on something the Premier said earlier. Can you tell us a bit more about the opportunities for the ageing sector in terms of employment and industry potential, etc.?
When you get a new set of demands and a new set of needs, it leads to technological change. So, for instance, all the assistive technologies for people to actually remain in their home and to remain safe. there are some incredible technologies now which permit people to be monitored if they choose about when they might have a fall. So obviously there's the alert technologies that we're all familiar with, but there are also other technologies now which are able to detect when people have essentially lost balance or fallen, and that can alert people to be checked on. So those, that's hardware backed up by software that can create new opportunities. These are new devices, new services that can occur. Then there's the whole question of nutrition, the whole idea of food, and the changing needs of people as they age is a critically important area. And the whole notion of food in some facilities as well is an area of challenge. I think we could all accept that there could be dramatic improvements in relation to food, and the opportunities around that are very powerful. So it's really using your imagination to actually, and listening to people, rather than older South Australians having to just consume what has always been offered during an era when really very different expectations and demands were made. So we're only limited by our imagination here. We're creating a framework where these questions can be asked, where older people can actually explain their needs, and smart people that actually have got an entrepreneurial spirit will work out how to turn a dollar out of that in a way which actually creates opportunities. So this can be a win-win. People might actually have a need which is not being met, but they may be prepared to pay somebody to meet. And this can actually create a whole new sector of the South Australian economy. So there's so much of what we talk about in disability and aged care is put through the prism of a deficit or a challenge or a burden. This could be an extraordinary flourishing, not only of the well-being of the individual, but also of employment opportunities.
I feel it's a very good question. I think we also need to look at training pathways and career pathways in terms of certificate 3. I mean, there's an issue there. There should be some more formal training. I think a mistake was made a number of years ago. This goes across the board, that industry skills boards were effectively defunded. It worked well in other states. It's a combination of collaboration between industry and the sector and the needs of consumers. So I think that there's enormous opportunity there. And also there's a key role for nurses to play, I think, in this sector as well in terms of career pathways. And there's all that now. I know this is out of order, and I think I freaked out to Stephen to ask him this. I'm trying to find out whether his dad sent him a postcard from his travels.
No, he didn't. But it probably won't surprise you and most of the women in the room that my dad never wrote letters and never will. But and I tended to operate on the attitude that no news was good news. But then when he got back to Adelaide and said that his SIM card wouldn't work overseas, it was misplaced trust.
Okay, thanks very much. I'm going to ask all our leaders now to do a 2-minute summer, and we might start with who's got the microphone. Stephen?
I might do it just stand. Yeah, I'd like to pick up on Margaret's question because it really talked about communities finding shared solutions. And COTA is used as one of its catchphrases, reframing aging. And I think that that's an opportunity not just for older people, it's an opportunity for our whole community. When I, again, use an anecdote, and politicians are horrible at focusing on anecdotes. When I was young, it was the common perception that a man would retire at 65 and be dead within a couple of years. But now it is going to be increasingly common for us to spend 20 or 30 years in retirement. Now that offers a huge threat for loneliness, and the UK has even appointed a minister with specific responsibility for loneliness. There's also a great opportunity for the community. If you've got older people who are opening their horizons, looking at volunteering opportunities, perhaps extending their working life, pursuing recreation opportunities, I think that's not only exciting for older people, I think it's also exciting for our community. so many of us have seen the degradation of the community over recent decades. And I think the ageing of the community the ageing of our population gives us a great opportunity to reinvigorate communities for the benefit of the whole society.
When we asked the Economic Development Board to give consideration to this whole question of ageing and the possibilities in front of us, it was probably a little counterintuitive. You don't traditionally think of ageing as an economic opportunity. But the work that they did and what they uncovered was extraordinary. And the willingness of COTA and a broad range of academic institutions and the business sector to actually partner together to actually realise this opportunity is one of the most exciting things that I've seen. Now, I can pretty much guarantee you that this won't get a big mention on the news because it hasn't been something which, when you talk about a new industry called ageing well, it's something which hasn't captured the public imagination, but it is massive. It is growing, and it will be one of the largest single sectors of the South Australian economy in the coming years. It's difficult to describe with a big glossy picture or to touch and feel, but it's the individual decisions that are being made by 60, 70, 80 and 90-year-olds about how they live their life, the demands for goods and services associated with it, the technologies that they will demand that will actually drive an extraordinary improvement in the well-being of older South Australians. And in the process, what they'll do is they'll spark the imaginations of entrepreneurs who will come up with new ideas to do new things in new ways. And the great thing about it is that the COTA, this movement, will be at the centre of this action. So when we're typically, a lot of focus is on the Property Council or Business SA, COTA will be at the centre of this new industry of the future. So I think it's an exciting prospect. Of course, there are also challenges to make sure that we protect the vulnerable. We know, sadly, whether it's children or older people, where there are vulnerabilities, there will be sadly predators, and we always need to be alert. I think that our eyes are wide open now to the fact that where bad things do happen to people when they're vulnerable, and so we need to take special steps to make sure that we are alert and we have the systems and processes that are available to ensure that those things never happen again. I know there's been some discussion about those awful revelations that we've seen in recent weeks. What I can tell you is the gentleman that now runs that facility and is responsible for the new model of care, Duncan McKellar, is absolutely determined to turn this from being one of the worst institutions that we've seen into a world-leading institution. And some of the things that are already happening with those older people who sadly have been detained and essentially restrained for their own good, it was alleged, now actually not needing that restraint, people that are walking that formerly were regarded as wheelchair-bound, people's well-being and attitude and their interactions with family members completely turned around because we had somebody that was prepared to take a completely different view of the picture in their mind about older people with challenging behaviours is just incredibly gratifying to see. So there are great people in our system that do wonderful things. We need to give them the power with authority, but also the money to make sure that they get the right results.
But Oakton shouldn't have happened because back in 2007, there were a number of breaches, some 63 breaches that were reported to the federal agency, and they are to blame as well. But we need to have mechanisms of accountability and transparency in the system, and that is what my party, SABS, is about. We want to strengthen those institutions of accountability to deal deeply with systemic reforms to ensure that scandals such as Oakton never, ever happen again. I don't disagree with what the Premier and the opposition spokesperson have said. I think there is common ground about ageing well, about doing things better, but we need to start with the basics, and those basics include implementing in full the Closing the Gaps report. It's been just sitting on the shelf for almost 6.5 years. It will make a sea change in the way we deal with vulnerable adults. It will deal with issues such as financial vulnerability. It will deal with issues of abuse. It was a good report, an outstanding report that has just been ignored by both, I would suggest by both sides, because the Parliament didn't have the political will to implement those changes. We need to do that. Can I just say there are enormous opportunities. This is about ageing well. It's about working with the Commonwealth and local governments to maximise and unleash the potential of our senior citizens. We haven't been doing it well. I like to think there's a common ground to do that. And can I just acknowledge finally, do not underestimate the role of COTA as a reasoned, sensible, pragmatic voice to actually air these concerns and to drive reform. You are respected across the board, the political spectrum, and that is something where it's an unusual thing for any people organisation to be so well regarded, I regarded, I think, by all politicians. So thank you to COTA. There are no excuses for the next Parliament of South Australia not to move quickly, expeditiously and well to implement reforms that are so long overdue.
Thank you very much, and I want to end up by saying I'm sorry we didn't get to all the questions. I could see hands up everywhere. It's a pity we didn't have time to address everybody's questions, but I think our aim today was to give you enough information that you could that would help you in thinking about your election decisions that you need to make. Just to let you know that as COTA will be developing, and we are developing a scorecard against our election platform. We want you to keep an eye on it, and you can do that by either joining COTA or joining our mailing list or looking at our website and keeping up with what's happening in terms of that. But I think we need to finish by saying thank you very much to Jay, Stephen and Nick for a very interesting discussion today and for being so willing to put their views out there to us. So please join us. Thank you all for coming and keep in touch with COTA.